So back in the 90s, it was commonplace for whenever a movie or a TV show got really popular that was aimed at a younger demographic, that eventually you ended up getting video games for it. I always thought this was a very cool thing, and really it's something I kind of miss. You know, whenever you saw these movies or TV shows, of course you would want to play video games with those same characters, so they were very popular. Now, obviously some of these were very hit or miss. Batman Forever, May You Burn in Hell, a fine film, but that game just absolutely sucks. But you had standout games, and one of the games that I feel was one of the best movie adaptations was Aladdin. Now, there's two versions of Aladdin out there. There's the Sega Genesis version, and of course the Super Nintendo version. And although they share the same name, once again, another cool thing about the 90s was all because two video games had the same name, didn't mean that they were the same game or have the same content. When it comes to Aladdin, Aladdin on Super Nintendo was made by Shinji Mikami. And I mean, yeah, you know, Capcom, good stuff. Shinji Mikami, you know, Resident Evil and stuff like that. But this isn't a survival horror game. This is a platforming game based on a Disney movie with an outstanding soundtrack. I can show you the world, shining, shimmering, splendid, a whole new world, a new fantastic point of view. No one to tell us know where to go. Eat your heart out, Rogers Bass. You're not the only video game YouTuber who can sing. But Aladdin on the Sega Genesis was light years better. It was light years better than the Super Nintendo version. I don't understand why people still debate this, because if you play the two games, like, yes, the Super Nintendo version is fine. The Sega Genesis version is clearly the superior version. Now, what makes the Sega Genesis version of this game special is Aladdin has two forms of attack. He can throw an apple, or he can use a sword. There is no sword in the Super Nintendo version, so by default, Aladdin on the Genesis is better. But beyond that, to me, Aladdin on the Genesis is just the more accurate experience. This game was designed hand in hand with Virgin, who of course worked directly with Disney. And the graphics of Aladdin on the Sega Genesis are some of the best graphics for a game, period, on the system. Everything looks like it should. Agrabah, all the different places that you visit in the movie and see in the movie, you see in the actual game. There's of course little nods to other Disney things like the Mickey Mouse ears on level 2, but even just like the levels themselves, really capturing the essence of the Aladdin film. I think this game just is so much better in terms of accuracy compared to the Super Nintendo edition. It actually looks more like a cartoon than a video game, and at the time it was very, very impressive. People were blown away by this. It won like best graphics awards. I don't know, I'm just making that up, but at least won it in my heart, because this game looks absolutely gorgeous. Of course, you have the audio of the game, which the Sega Genesis wasn't really known for great audio or anything like that. It had some wonky moments with that sound chip, but this game was one of the better sounding games when it comes to just composition and of course sounding similar to the movie. Tommy Tallarico worked on this before he became a absolute psychopath with the Intellivision Amico. How's that working out, Thomas? But I think the music in this game is fantastic. Obviously, it's based on the Disney movie itself, but the composition of it is really well done. But the gameplay is where Aladdin on the Genesis is just so much better than Aladdin on the Super Nintendo. Aladdin on the Super Nintendo at times feels almost like a bit more of a parkour style game, which I don't think is bad, because when you look at the Game Gear version of Aladdin, you know, there were some parkour style levels that were kind of like runner levels where you're constantly moving in perpetual motion, but the combat wasn't really a focus in Aladdin on the Super Nintendo, whereas in Genesis, combat was very important. And I think the combat in this game and just really the controls and the platforming that's within it are just so much better in this version of the game than the Super Nintendo. It's not just all platforming and sword swinging and stuff like that. You of course have things like riding the little rug and stuff with a boo when you go into the Cave of Wonders to try to get the diamond in the rough. Like, you know, you go to get the genie's lamp and stuff like that. It's like a cool sort of thing where you're riding the carpet and then you gotta like avoid attacks. It's like a horizontal shooter game. But like the genie is super cool in it. There's just it's just such a better game on the Sega Genesis. And I don't understand why people like the Super Nintendo version more. If you grew up with it, like, that's fine. I can understand it. But the Genesis just offers a more accurate experience when it comes to this film. Of course, there's different sorts of cheats you could do within it, as was pretty much the standard for games of that era. You could get different live codes and stuff like that. It's kind of a challenging game. I don't think it's, you know, necessarily difficult, but it's not really a walk in the park either. Like, you'll probably die, mostly because you're trying to figure out different things. Like, I remember the level where Aladdin goes into like jail and he gets arrested and you have to get out of the jail. There was some tricky platforming in there, but I really like how it just takes the scenes from the movie and replicates them in a video game. It doesn't really take any sort of liberties with anything in it. It's pretty much true to the film, which I think a lot of people would want. You know, that's what made some of these 90s Disney games really special, was that they took the source material and they accurately made a game based on it. We're going to talk about another 90s Disney game actually this week as well. Well, depending on when Brett edits these, because he might edit this one second and then the other game would be first, and then you would just be confused as to why I said that. But the Aladdin version of Genesis, I loved it as a kid. I love it as an adult. I think it's just an absolutely stellar game. Even if you take away the license of Aladdin, I think it's still a great game. Obviously, we couldn't have voice acting then or anything like that, so we didn't get Scott Wiener from Full House. Remember Steve from Full House, the boyfriend of DJ? He was the voice of Aladdin, and they actually referenced that on the Full House show. But this is a great game. You know, it's not expensive either, so if you have a Sega Genesis, I recommend picking up a copy. But if you just want to emulate it, like, go ahead and emulate it. But you owe it to yourself to play this game. It looks absolutely gorgeous. The audio in it is fantastic. Like, yes, the Super Nintendo version exists. It's fine on its own, but it is not superior to the Sega Genesis version. You want to start console wars again in 2023 with 90s based consoles? I'll go to war with you. I will smack the I'm just kidding. But anyways, let me know in the comment section down below. Did you have Aladdin growing up? Did you play Aladdin growing up? If so, which platform did you play it on? There were handheld versions of the game as well. The Game Boy one was okay, like, it existed. It was funny because the Game Boy one was actually kind of based on the Sega Genesis one. So that goes right there and shows you what was the superior version of Aladdin. It was the Genesis. It was always the Genesis. It will always be the Genesis. And as always, guys, thank you for visiting me on my stash. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of Aladdin. What are some other games you would like to hear me talk about and ramble about and share childhood memories of? Who knows? Maybe I'll pick that game, and I don't know, maybe I won't. It all depends on how you behave. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.